Can you hear it now? Okay. Okay. Do we have any visitors today? Any visitors today? Okay. All right. Well, we have several announcements. The committee sign-ups for next year are over here on the table. So if you'd like to be a part of one of the committees or more than one, please sign up over here after class, and we'd love to have you participate. Also, our class brunch sign-up is, do we have that to pass around? Does Tammy have that? Tammy will bring it. Okay. All right. When she comes, we'll have her started. Okay. Emergency infant services. We're going to pass around an envelope this year. Our class treasury was a bit depleted because of the COVID deal. So anyway, this year we're going to just pass the envelope, and you can make a donation directly to them. I'll just start it right there. Just pass that around if you wouldn't mind. Just go back. Yeah, back there. Okay, and then we have blankets over here for the day center. If you bring one today or this week or whatever, we'll have them over there. So, and food for Iron Gate is Linda's pointing at the basket right there. If you brought food for Iron Gate, we have a basket right there to put that in. So lots of opportunities here. Okay. Why don't we start with a prayer real quick? Father, we thank you for this day and the opportunity to gather here for fellowship and to learn. We ask that you be with those that need your strength for issues they face. We ask your blessing on our class and our church as we move forward with our mission. These things we pray in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay, our speaker today. Yes, good idea. Yeah, we had a great party. I hope most everybody got to attend. It was really a neat deal. So thanks to the committee. Okay, our speaker today is our own Buzz McDaniel, Ron, and Buzz and Linda have been members of our class for a number of years. Buzz was former VP of the Educational Development Corporation and is currently serving as chairman of the Tulsa Metropolitan Foundation Board. And I don't want any of you guys to get nervous, but Buzz is going to speak on morality today. So Buzz, I'm going to turn it over to you. Come on up.
All right, good. Well, I'm going to start off this morning just kind of with a general observation. That is, I don't know if any of you all have noticed this, but I have seen a pronounced inclination in myself and among a few of friends as our youth advances, that there's two things that seem to happen. Meandering is a more common experience, and repetition is a frightfully common experience. And so I'm going to start off meandering this morning, and the only hope that I have on that, at least I'm identifying it in advance, that the meandering is here. About 45 years ago, I was invited by two of the very best members and people these churches ever had to make a presentation to the challengers, and that was Raymond and Janet Briggs. Now that was a big risk on their part, and it introduced my late wife and myself to Harvard Avenue Christian Church, and that's certainly been one of the kindest and best gifts any other person could ever have given to myself and to our families. Being a part of this church has just been exceptional. Now, I'm saying that because I have come to recognize over the years that when you lead off speaking, that you always want to say something nice. And you kind of try to create this rapport with the audience. I have never yet had a guy or a woman stand up and say, I wish I was anywhere but here this morning. You people will never understand the complexity of what I'm going to be talking about. So, I found that if you look back and listen to people giving introductions and so forth, why, usually the saying goes along the line, how delighted they are to be here. What an exceptionally capable group of people you are hearing it, and what a real pleasure it is, and we hope to get to do this often. Well, that's my opening introduction here I guess, pander a little bit or whatever you wish to call it. I think that it is difficult for me, in a sense, with Harvard Avenue, to not say a couple of things, and they are hopefully sincere, not otherwise, and that is that in living a lot of years at this point in time, as many of us have done, that this seems to me to be one of the unique churches that I have ever seen. And I would say that this particular class we have here has been one of the most generous, caring, and supportive groups of people I've ever been associated with. Now, hopefully I've established the rapport. We'll hope for that anyway. Morality. I have had the chance, given the advice by a gentleman sitting over to my left, Mr. Jim Boswell. We were talking very briefly the other day, and I mentioned that I was going to be speaking about morality. And I said, well, Jim, I'm a thoughtful guy. I'm sure he had some insights that would really be helpful to me on this. And so I said, Jim, I'm going to be speaking on morality this upcoming Sunday. What are your thoughts? And Jim said, I'm for it. And he said, Jim, well, okay, what do you think about immorality? And he said, I'm against it. Now, theoretically, we could just say, folks, it's been wonderful to be here this morning. You've got the whole message right there. But that actually did happen. Leading off here, I'm going to talk about real excitement. I'm going to kind of go to the Webster's Dictionary, because I have found in making this presentation once over in Oklahoma City that asking each person, when you ask an individual what they consider morality to be, there's really quite a bit of divergence, and there's a lot of opinions that can come up about morality. So I'm going to read a couple, three definitions here, and then we will turn to the question itself. This is really dry stuff. Morality of or pertaining to distinctions between right and wrong, good and evil, in relation to the actions, volitions, or character of responsible persons. Now that's something you probably will remember word for word, but that's Webster. Morals is conforming to standards of what is right or just in behavior. Now there's two other sides to morality, and two other definitions I wanted to offer, because we're going to visit at least a little bit about them. One is the word amoral. Not immoral, but amoral. And amoral is that belief and actions are not to be called good or bad, that does not admit of moral distinctions or judgments. That's when you talk about amorality, you're simply talking about persons, individuals who look at things without passing much judgment and certainly don't confirm good or evil. And then immoral, which beliefs and actions that are fundamentally contrary to the established moral judgments and principles that exist in society. So that's kind of the opening aspect here, trying to understand what morality might be and what, at least technically, it's put down in the dictionary. I'm going to ask you all just to think a moment as we go along here, because I want to raise a question, and you're going to, if you will, be kind enough to give me a response. There's no right or wrong answer on it. It's just a response, how you feel about things. If you kind of affirm the following, if you wouldn't mind just real quickly raising your hand. I think that the society in which we live in today is fundamentally a more moral society than the society which I perceived to exist when I graduated from college, or let's say from the age of 25 on. And I say those who believe we are living in a more moral society today as contrasted to age 25. If you just raise your hands. Okay, 1, 2, we got a couple there. Okay, I would like to then say those who feel like the society in which we live in today is what we would call a less moral society, and that is that the values that are shown and espoused are not as good and more detrimental to society as a whole than at that similar age when we previously talked about. If you'd raise your hand. I guess we got a little focus to work with here. Yes. All right.
Is that not what you expected?
No, I really, honestly, it really was. When I raised that question, I really should put an asterisk on there, and that asterisk would be, my guess is over the course of time, when you get a group of people who are, let us be kind to ourselves, 60 and above, probably there is an inclination to think that things are not as good as they were back when. I think that is a normal inclination. I think even giving that inclination, that the percentages are pretty dramatic in terms of a perception of how society is evolving in direction. The next thing I'd like to offer as just a general observation and ask you to give thought to this. Morality changes. We don't get a constant set of rules by which we operate beginning year one and continuing on and on and on, and they never change. I'd like you all to think a moment, and in our lifetime here, there's the answer. What forms of morality have changed? What things were considered to be bad 40 or 50 years ago that are now considered acceptable? What things were considered acceptable that might now be considered bad? I will throw one out that is only would apply to a few of us perhaps in the audience, that having been raised in a very Methodist home, grandfather who was a Methodist minister, alcohol never touched our lips, and we had none in our household. And it was really perceived to be a moral achievement to be an abstainer. 50 years later, probably I've reversed field on that one, would be fair to say. But give thought, man. Just anybody come up with any areas where you think morality has changed, where things that were considered good or considered bad have reversed?
How about language?
Yep.
Say hell 60 years ago.
You're right, Jim. Language. Jim said language. That's when you go to a movie today and hear the language contrasted to what we heard in the 50s or early 60s, it is, let's just be kind and say it's dramatically different. Yeah, Nat. Living together, yeah. Before marriage, yes. That clearly is a differentiation that in our time and so forth, as I recall, it was called living in sin. If you remember that. That was terminology that was often used. Anyone else? Yeah, Richard. Pardon? Pardon?
Dancing and going to the movies.
Dancing and going to the movies. Richard, I've been an active sinner for a long time, man. Yeah, Les. Sex before marriage. Yeah. Well, I won't ask, was it worth it? Right.
So I'm thinking about homosexual, same-sex marriage. You know, that's had a sea change for the good in the last 50 years.
Yes.
That's a big change. We're letting go like that.
Absolutely, Mike. Other thoughts? Anybody else have any? Yeah.
Marijuana would probably have to go on the list somewhere.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, without question, Bill. Frank.
Role of women. Role of women. I have 2 daughters.
That's very true, Frank. Very true. Everyone's on target. Anything else? Okay, the next question I would like to ask, and then we actually will get to talking a little bit about this book we're supposed to be referring to here. Would you kind of give some, I'm sorry, excuse me.
I don't know where you're going to put this, but segregation comes to mind every time I think of morality. Because back in the olden days, we were so moral, keep them on the other side of the street or somewhere else.
Yes, that's very good. Now I'd like to ask you to think in terms of morality. Those parts of our society with which we live today, in which one group views one response as extremely moral, and the other group has exactly the same sense of morality, but a totally opposite viewpoint. Both being convinced that they are the possessors of morality, the high ground behavior. Any thoughts? Abortion stands as perhaps the most most evident of things. We see that constantly, and each side is adamant in their belief that the stance they're taking is the moral response that should be given to that question. Others? Gun control. Yeah. Bear arms, yeah. Capital punishment, yes, very definitely. Very strong feelings on both sides, each with a great sense of conviction of the rightness of their. Anything else that anyone has in mind? The only other, Janet. Yep. That's right on top of us, isn't it? Yeah, and we do certainly get strong feelings about that question. Immigration, yes. There are a lot of things out there in which we have very, very strong feelings on each side. The decision whether to terminate one's own life was one that came to my mind. That is an area there where some people think that living on and being a burden and so forth to the state and to your family is an immoral and irresponsible thing when you know you will never get better. Others say there's no condition under which a person can take their lives. In a sense on that, Jim? Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's good. That's very true. And again, those are areas where there's very little give or take of it. It's pretty much the same. Well, I think what I was hopefully trying to say there is that morality is not a clear-cut series of answers that we can rely on all the time. And yet, all of us, I think, have a real sense that somehow or another, we would like to perceive of ourselves as being moral individuals, living moral lives, living with a sense of morality within the community and the society in which we live. That remains important to us. And that is sort of where we begin, if we could use this terminology, with a book that I happened to stumble upon. It's called Morality, Restoring the Common Good in Divided Times. It's by a gentleman named Jonathan Sacks. Jonathan Sacks, I think, is the retired now rabbi for the United Kingdom, the chief rabbi for the United Kingdom and for the European Union. He has written a number of books over the years, and I've seen him and heard him a couple of times on television. He is a very thoughtful person, and he clearly brings to his perspective on this, and it's, in my mind, a very positive thing. A bit more of a, a bit more of a Jewish impact on it and understanding is, but it is certainly, I think, a universal kind of attitude that he has. And it's Frank has read the book and studied it, and it's kind of a challenging, interesting book. But we're obviously going to be skimming over things quite a bit as we try to go through 350 pages here. And I have to also add one thing as kind of something we're doing that's a bit unusual at this point in time. This is a 2-lesson event, but the next lesson on this event is January 25th. Gives you lots of time to either say, man, that was really stupid stuff this guy talked about, or maybe there's a little bit of agreement, but leaves the opportunity to think about it. Rabbi Sacks starts off with a statement here that I think is an important one and worth considering. And he says, a free society is a moral achievement. I'd like you to think about that. A free society is a moral achievement. And it's an achievement that is certainly not to be taken lightly. But it is Rabbi Sacks' opinion that this viewpoint is one that has increasingly been either ignored, just viewed as irrelevant, whatever you might wish to say, over the past 50 years. That we have taken for granted that we have a moral society, and that we're exceptional people. The problem with this is, as Rabbi Sacks sees it, is that when we fail to recognize that morality is such a significant part of our well-lived life, when we fail to realize that, we enter into some areas of real problems. The society of today that we live in, he would say, is really dominated by two things. One is the market economy. Certainly no one, I think, would deny that the economic impact in our market economy has great control of the lives of much of us, works very hard to create its own set of ethics and values. When we watch the constant activity of television, advertising, and so forth, it has its purpose of trying to look at life in a certain way with a certain set of values. The second great force that he feels exists at this point in time is the liberal democratic political process that we follow. Certainly government has an enormous impact on all of our lives in a variety of ways, whether recipients of any kind of sustenance from the government, whether it's rules, regulations, what you can do and not do, and so forth. The government has great impact on it. These two have had their good moments, clearly, when they have been beneficial. But Rabbi Sacks says both, or our situation in which we find ourselves today, is essentially this: that if these are not tempered by morality, you're going to result in some very negative outcomes on this. That a society without a sense of common good, without a sense of justice, without a sense of concern for the other, for respect of rights of all and so forth, is not a society that is going, as he puts it quite frankly, is not going to survive. It simply will not happen. The other aspect, or among other aspects I want to focus on this, is that within this framework of where we are today, what should be a threefold item: state, economy, morality, and so forth, and the religious views, etc., that we have. Those three work together in balance. If they don't exist, you get a distortion. And we are in a distorted period at this point in time because of this loss of our moral direction. It's his belief that the economic system can do miraculous things, but it can be harsh and brutal. And it really is not particularly designed as a moral entity. It is designed as an entity that provides certain efficiencies and outcomes within the economic activities. The government does certain things effectively, probably all of us might say it does certain things ineffectively. But if we accept it as the major outsource to which we turn to take care of our major social problems, then we run into real difficulty there also. So we're in the midst of a pretty challenging time, and how we work our way out of this and evolve out of this is difficult. And why? Why are we here? Well, there's a lot of reasons, and we'll try to touch on a few of them. But Rabbi Sack very much believes that over the course of really a fairly long period of time, but in a highly accelerated period of time, roughly beginning in the 50s or 60s, we have had a movement within our society from what we might call a we-oriented society to an I-oriented society. It is me, not us. And that this movement puts everything in a situation where our evaluations, our responses are greatly impacted really by thinking about, well, what will this do to me? I don't care if the bridge is falling down. I don't go down that. I don't ride on that bridge. We can talk about all sorts of things. It is just simply what works for me is what's important. And if it doesn't work for me, if it doesn't impact me, then I'm relatively indifferent to it. This we, I think, can be seen in lots of different areas. Hopefully I will try to identify my biases and not put them on Reverend Sack. But I've noticed over the past probably 5 or 10 years, particularly in my mind, in contemporary religious music, that it seems to me most of it is talking about all the things that are going to be done for me if I'm a believer. All the benefits that are going to accrue to me. I've retained, I don't want to say effectively do it too much, but it seems to me that what the Bible has to say talks about serving God and not God serving us. And yet we have seen, I think, to a great degree, this sort of reversal of effects. But this I-we dichotomy has occurred within a time frame where we can all remember back in the 60s and carrying on forward this time, where it was this period of self-realization. I think all of us can remember that people were encouraged to look to your inner self, to achieve your fullest capabilities and skills, to really be focused on yourself. I didn't ever like that. And as I've told Linda before, I always had the feeling if I looked in there and saw what my fullest capabilities were, I was going to be deeply disappointed. And I preferred to live with the illusion that maybe there was a little more there than was being exhibited. But this preoccupation with the self, with the individual, and again, self-achievement seemed to be an element that came forth. It was perhaps what we would call the culmination of events that Rabbi Sachs kind of throws out some little interesting tidbits along the way, saying that perhaps the first person who really introduced us into and got us going into the I notion was none other than Martin Luther. Sort of seemed like a bit of a thing, but Luther, came to the conclusion that it was the relationship of the individual and the Almighty that was key, and that when even he used the analogy, when you face death, you don't face it with anyone else. It is you and you alone standing there, and that the I becomes a critical thing. That when we talk about the I am concept, whereas it once was related to the biblical I am, it now merged to the I am of human beings. It reflected itself in a number of sort of interesting aside notes there, one of which, as I get older, I greatly resent, the emergence of mirrors. I try to avoid those anymore. Self-portraits. Artists began to self-portrait themselves. Rooms were created with individual chairs rather than ones where groups sat together. Churches began to have more individual chairs rather than sitting as a group. Artists or writers would write autobiographies about themselves. Probably not much of a factor before the 1600s or 1700s, but again, an indicator of the process of upticking to more and more of looking at myself and being concerned with myself. Well, this has, as I say, done certainly some wonderful things, and I don't think we would want to be saying, that everyone is supposed to live a life of no concern for themselves or their well-being and so forth. It has just seemed that it has become an extreme type of response, and that there really isn't, there is a deep problem within this framework of the I-oriented society, and that is that the realm of morality becomes more an area for self-justification than looking at the broader perspective of the good and the bad. One of the, I think, most interesting, hopefully I can find it here in this book, persons that Rabbi Sachs refers to is a gentleman named Alexis de Tocqueville. De Tocqueville, as probably most of you will remember, was a young French nobleman who came over to the United States. And interesting enough, he came here to do an appraisal of the prison system. I don't know if most of you were familiar with that, but at that point in time, the prison system in the United States was viewed as sort of one of the ideals, and other nations around the world were looking into it. He became fascinated with the American people and the American culture, and wrote, of course, Democracy in America, which is truly one of the great classic books of description of America at that point in time. And he liked America. He liked Americans. And he thought they were an interesting, vibrant people. He said there was one kind of thing that interested him about Americans. And he may have been the first person to coin this, I don't know, but he said there was a great emphasis on individualism in the United States that he did not see nearly as much of that in Europe as he did in America. Now, by that, he didn't necessarily mean we were an overly egotistical or ego-centered people. We were just individualistic. He said, and I'd like to read this if you permit me, he said, "Our fathers knew of egoism, a passionate and exaggerated love of self. Individualism is different. It is less a failing of character than an environment." It's less a failing of character than an environment. A feeling which disposes each citizen to isolate himself from the mass of his fellows, so that having created a small company for his use, he willingly leaves the large society to itself. The danger on this, he thinks, is that in the long run, people will simply, if, as he saw the Americans at this point in time, that the Americans would have an inclination to cease to have interest in anything other than that small group which they have created for themselves. People would simply cease to interest themselves in the welfare of others, and they would leave that responsibility to the state. And here is sort of an interesting addendum that I think from a person writing in the 1830s, as I recollect. "And the state would grow ever larger until it became a benign tyranny." Now, I think that's kind of a profound insight, in my judgment, of a person writing in the 1830s looking at the American character and talking about both its strengths and virtue. And he goes on to say, and this I think is extremely valuable, what stands as the offset to this inclination within our society is a uniqueness of the culture. He felt really very strongly that the American culture was a quite unique situation. He said he had never seen as many small communities in which there were groups, organizations, churches, various institutions and individuals who would rally around each other, who would accept responsibility, who would make sure to look after the benefit of others and create a society that was a reasonably whole and decent society. And he said, therein is the great opportunity of the American nation. If they can maintain that, if we can maintain that same set of values, concerns, and so forth, then it can continue to be a uniquely great nation. Well, have we done that? Maybe. Maybe. I look around, and again, this is a non-pandering statement. I look at this church and this class, and I think it's as fine an example as you will ever see of generosity, caring, and so forth. I mean that in all sincerity. I guess if maybe he would warn us a little bit, perhaps we have to be careful about looking inwardly too much to take care of ourselves. But still, it is in institutions and entities such as this that the real opportunity for a moral society existed, as Mr. de Tocqueville mentioned. Well, Rabbi Sack then turns and lists about 4 or 5 areas right now as he sees events going on in our country. Some of them we will talk about on the 25th. But he is a very strong believer that a moral society has to be based upon 2 things. And this is very, very conventional, and it may not register too well with you. He thinks that the commitment to marriage is extremely important. Now, he is not saying here, and he emphasized that every marriage is made in heaven and that events cannot happen and people don't. But the institution itself, he said, is a unique situation in terms of the ameliorating forces of society. Number one, or the reasons he goes into. Number one, it forces you, as we all know, not to think of yourself all the time. You just don't have that choice anymore. That one's gone. You have to give a little thought about the well-being of someone else. It forces you to learn how to love. And by that I mean to have a sense of affection, but also of a creative goodwill, not only to those closest to you, but those outside of the framework of your normal relationships and friendships. That it provides for you the opportunity of growth. You have a partner, whatever it may be, whose views and ideas move beyond your own and expand your thoughts and understanding of the world. And so, for many, many reasons, he believes that this is one of the most important institutions that a society can have. And it must be an effective continuing part. And what are the facts about our marriage situation today? Declined quite a bit. I think in the 1960s, about 72% of the people were married, of the marriageable age people were married, probably about 50% right now. There's just a sense, as we alluded to in our earlier comments, that there wasn't any great reason why people should necessarily get married. You just go ahead and live and do what you have been doing. You don't have that burden on you, and if things don't work out the door we go. There isn't much to support that as being a terribly constructive response in terms of the facts and figures. We think, well, maybe that does make sense. It doesn't in terms of what goes on in society, in terms of relationships, people staying together, and so forth. The second area that he turns to, and that would probably be pretty obvious, is the family. That you simply cannot construct a moral society if the family does not play a significant role. Now, his belief on that is essentially two or three reasons there too. One is that you again are called upon to a sense of moving away from total selfishness. You gain, this is my comment, not his, you gain humility. I know very few people who've raised children who at one time or another, at least certainly our experience, events occurred that you didn't really think were likely to occur within the process of raising your children. And most of them were not ones that you were delighted to have happen. They kind of brought you down to your knees. But the process is extraordinarily significant. First of all, and we look at our society today and we wonder why some of the very negative things that have happened are going on. Maybe a little bit of it fits into this questioning that Rabbi Sack raises. A family teaches children constantly. It teaches them, hopefully, the following attributes: affection, love, certain degree of respect, certain degree of having to get along with people when you really don't want to. And it also teaches you the first elements of altruism. The first beginning to look at and think, well, maybe not everything is going to be about me, and well, maybe we will need to look at how we can relate to others in a constructive and positive fashion. Once again, the statistics have not been so very great. in this area for our families in this country, as we all know, and he quotes a number of them. But it is his judgment that that is an emphasis that is of extreme importance. One of the emergent events of the past 30 to 40 to 50, 60 years, whatever it might be, is that we have become a nation who believes, maybe we don't believe in, but we are committed to outsourcing. Outsourcing in lots of ways. We outsource memory recollection, we outsource maintenance care of the old and so forth. We have turned the point that this large group, which is once again our democratic political government on that, and rather than accept the responsibilities that we might have toward our community and others, we have turned that over and said it is up to the government, in this case, most instances, to be responsible for the well-being and the care of many, many people, many young people, many single people, all sorts of persons. And the result of this, of course, is that you're left with a situation where, with the best of intentions, you have a group of people emerging who have not had the actual physical experience of care, the learning of altruism, the learning of reaching out to others and accepting compromise and so forth. And he thinks it is one of the great dangers that faces any country. In his judgment, there would be no nation that would be able to survive effectively without these two attributes. Again, it is a very traditional, long-time standing value system, but just because it is that, Rabbi Sachs does not believe that it does not apply as much today as it ever has. Well, we're kind of reaching the point where I want to open up to any questions, but there's another thing or two we will talk about coming up in the future, and perhaps maybe closing out with this today. A couple of weeks ago, Linda and I were over in Oklahoma City and we were attending an event, and I sat next to the gentleman who is the dean of the, what is it, Linda? Dean Parker? Yeah, Dean of Music at Oklahoma City University. And I was saying, well, how are things going? He said, fine. And I said, how's your enrollment? He said, well, it's dropped off. Not a lot, but it's dropped off. He said, in the past, we had more people applying and wanting to be accepted than had previously existed. And I am now going out recruiting, talking to individuals to encourage them to come. And I said, well, what do you attribute that to? He said, I'm not sure, and I don't know what all the reasons are. Certainly COVID is part of it. But he said that I find many of our young people are fearful. They're fearful. They don't want to move too far away from home because they're concerned about what's going on in the world, and they want to stay closer. And this was an experience and an emotion that he said 3 years ago he simply did not find at all. Rabbi Isaac talks about this generally within our community, and he said, we live with the most secure, well-informed, knowledgeable group of young people that have ever existed on this earth, bar none. They have fewer real ultimate risks, most of them, not all, but most of them have that, and they live in a very, very secure environment, and yet we live in a society in which our young people live with greater concern and fear than has existed for a long, long time. He talks about the attributes of drug use, which has gone up immeasurably throughout the entire society. You've probably heard over the last week that they announced that now 100,000 people in this past 12-month time had died of drug abuse in this country. A high percentage of those would be young people. Young people today talk about and involve themselves in more self-infliction of injury and suicide than far exceeding any past experience we've had, gone up in percentiles of 50, 75 to 100%. And so the question is, number one, why is this so? Why do we have youngsters that are this insecure? Certainly the I, me formula has an awful lot to do with it. The Facebook and the various other items that conjure up an image of perfection on the part of some that creates great insecurity in the other. But I would suggest that the final element on that too is that we have, in the area of family, failed to begin to convey, except in circumstances, churches like ours and certainly many other good churches around, a sense of altruism, a sense of concern of morality. And without that, there is sort of a hollow center that exists in a community on the part of the individuals. And we will not readily get back to a healthy society until we are able to reaffirm and reclaim those values. We will continue with there a month from now. And as always, thank you very much for your attention. Yeah, questions, fire away.
Do you think that the media has a lot to do with our conception of morality? I think they report things today that they would have been very hesitant to put in print or report on the radio. And we know about it immediately and consistently for weeks.
It certainly seems to me that it has a great impact. I feel like, and these are just, I guess, trite phases, that we have moved to the point in reporting in that type of field, in the field of the media, that we value celebrity over content. There seems to be the ongoing reality that we deal with, and I don't see it any. At some point, or another. Oh, Mike, go ahead. Go ahead. Fire away. Go ahead. I'm sorry. Is war what, Mike? Well, fortunately, I have the answer for that. That's almost a whole. Interesting enough, Mike, Rabbi Sack has written a book on the question of force and war, entitled "Not in My Name," and we might take a look at that one of these days. But it's I think we have felt in the past that there have been moral wars. Yes, it becomes more remote and more difficult, I think, now. Jim?